All right, when I say the word tithing, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, right, it's pretty simple. 10% of your income goes straight to your church. End of story. But what if that's not the whole story? What if that's just one piece of a much bigger, more interesting puzzle? Let's take a look at a model that might have been forgotten.
So, is it really just about giving 10% of your income to a church? The source material we're looking at today puts that question front and center. It basically says, hey, hold on a second. It challenges that simple, linear way of thinking about tithing and really pushes us to dig a little deeper into where this all came from. The suggestion here is that maybe, just maybe, we've lost something really important along the way.
And here's the core argument from our source. The original idea of tithing wasn't this flat, predictable payment. Nope. It was more like a cycle, a rhythm. The purpose of the tithe actually changed depending on the year. And it had this huge, powerful focus on taking care of the community, on social welfare. So where in the world does an idea like that come from?
Well, to build this case, our source takes us way back, right back to the foundation of the whole practice, which is found in the ancient harvest laws of the Old Testament. The argument is simple. You can't really get the tithe until you get the harvest it was based on.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. The source points out a key distinction between two different laws. Check this out. Before anyone even thought about calculating a tithe, there was something called the law of leftovers. Basically, farmers were told not to harvest their fields right to the very edge. They had to leave the gleanings, the leftovers, for the poor, the foreigners, the widows, the most vulnerable people in society. It was like a built-in social safety net. Then, and only then, was the tithe calculated on the net harvest, what was left after that first act of social care was already done.
So what happened with that tithe on the net harvest? Well, according to the source, looking at texts in Deuteronomy, it wasn't a one-size-fits-all thing. It actually worked on a 3-year cycle. For year 1 and year 2, that tithe was for the family that grew the crops. It was meant to be used for a big feast, a celebration. But year 3 was a completely different story. Yeah, in that 3rd year, the tithe didn't stay with the family. It was taken to a central community storehouse, and this is where you really see that social welfare part kick in. The tithe was handed out to the Levites, the landless tribe who served the temple, but it was also specifically given to foreigners, orphans, and widows. It was, for all intents and purposes, a direct, community-wide social support system. But the source argues this whole cyclical idea goes back even further. To find the precedent, we have to look at the story of Abram, the guy who's often pointed to as the first ever tithe giver. So, the source points out 4 separate times Abram got a major influx of wealth, right? He got stuff in Haran, no tithe mentioned. He gained a bunch of wealth in Egypt, again, no mention of a tithe. He received gifts at Gerar, crickets on the tithing front. It was only on the 3rd major acquisition, the spoils he recovered from a war, that he gave a 10th to the priest Melchizedek. And this is the key takeaway the source presents. Abram's example doesn't actually support tithing on everything you earn. Instead, it seems to mirror that same 3-part cycle. The first 2 gains were for his own household, but that 3rd one, that was different. It had a special purpose, a sacred portion that was given away. Okay, so that's all ancient history, right? An agricultural society. How on earth could a model like that apply to us today with our paychecks and our modern economy? Well, you might be surprised. The source proposes a pretty direct application. And here it is. The core idea is called the 3-time tithing cycle. It's pretty straightforward. For every 3 paychecks you get, the purpose of your tithe changes, directly mirroring that ancient pattern we've been talking about. But wait, before we get into the cycle itself, there's a really important point the source makes. It's adamant that tithing only applies to your net income, your take-home pay. It sees income tax not as your money being taken, but as your contribution to society, your civic duty. It's kind of like a modern version of that old law of leftovers. So the tithe is only calculated after you've fulfilled that duty to the wider community. So here's how this would actually look for you. You get your first paycheck, and the tithe from that is for you and your household's spiritual life. Maybe a family retreat, books, whatever. The source calls it a feast of worship. Same thing for your second paycheck. But that 3rd paycheck, that's where this model gets really different from what most of us are used to. And this really is the heart of the whole argument. That 3rd tithe, it's not for you. It's not for a new church building. Its purpose is crystal clear. It's for social justice. It's a direct echo of that special 3rd year in the ancient cycle. So imagine this. The tithe from that 3rd paycheck, from every single worker following this model, gets collected. It's all pooled together into one huge national storehouse of tithes. This isn't just you giving a little here and there. It's a massive structure of collective effort. So, what happens to all that money?
Well, the proposed distribution is, honestly, it's pretty stunning. Take a look. Only 10% of this massive pooled fund is used to support ministers. Just 10%. The other 90%, the vast, overwhelming majority, goes directly to social projects.
And we're not talking about vague ideas here. The source is super specific about what that 90% is for. It's for tangible, direct help, food and water for the hungry, shelter for the homeless, clothing, education, transportation for those who are helpless, care for the sick and those in prison. It's about taking a financial principle and turning it into real, on-the-ground action.
So let's just step back for a second and look at the big picture. What does this all add up to? The model our source presents completely reframes tithing. It's no longer just a flat obligation. It becomes this living, breathing cycle that balances personal spiritual life with this incredible, structured, and radical generosity. There's a quote cited in the source that just nails the whole spirit of this idea. "Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth." It's a powerful call to stop just talking about faith and to start building real, compassionate action right into the financial plumbing of that faith. And that really leaves us with a final, pretty provocative question to chew on. This whole model asks us to imagine a world where charity isn't some separate thing we do when we feel like it. What if caring for the poor wasn't an optional extra, but was a built-in, non-negotiable part of a person's spiritual and financial life? Just think, what would our world look like if that was the case?